It all began with something as small and unassuming as a wooden bridge. For 30 years, that bridge had stood across the narrow stream at the edge of my land, a modest but dependable structure built by my father's hands. To most, it was just a simple crossing, but to me, it carried memories of long summers fishing with my son, of evenings when my late wife would stand there, pointing out the way the sunset painted the water. That bridge was more than timber and nails. It was part of the history of my family's land. When the developers came in 15 years ago, buying up parcels all around me to build their luxury waterfront community, I knew life was about to change. Gone were the quiet nights when the only sounds came from owls in the pines. Instead, came the hum of contractors, bulldozers tearing into the earth, and later, the shrill sound of HOA meetings held under white tents like some kind of carnival. They built their million-dollar homes with sprawling glass windows overlooking the man-made lake they were so proud of. A lake, I might add, held up by a dam whose origins they didn't seem to fully understand. The dam was old, built decades ago, when the town had fewer rules and fewer busybodies. I knew about it because my grandfather had worked with the original builder. That lake existed not because of their money, but because of the work of old-timers like him. When the Homeowners Association started flexing its muscles, I tried to keep my head down. They sent letters, of course. Nasty ones written in that official language that always manages to feel like both a threat and a lecture. They wanted me to join their HOA, to maintain uniformity and community standards. I refused every time. My land had been in my family for 3 generations. No HOA was going to tell me what color mailbox I could have or when I could cut my grass. They didn't like that one bit, and the hostility simmered for years, though I managed to avoid most of it, until the bridge. It was early spring when I noticed the yellow ribbons tied around the posts at either end. At first, I thought maybe the county had some plans for the creek, but no, it was the HOA. They claimed the bridge was a hazardous structure that threatened the safety of the community. Their excuse? Children from the neighborhood sometimes wandered across my property to fish at the creek, and the bridge wasn't up to code. I told them flat out those kids shouldn't be on my land in the first place, and if their parents couldn't keep an eye on them, that wasn't my responsibility. My land, my bridge, my rules. But they didn't care. A week later, I came home to find a demolition crew tearing the bridge apart. Splinters floated in the water, and the posts my father had driven deep into the bank lay tossed on the shore like trash. I saw red. That bridge was mine on my property. No one asked. No one had the right. It felt like a violation, like they'd reached into my family album and torn out a page. I stormed into the HOA president's office the next day. His mansion sat on the prime spot of the lake, all glass and stone like some kind of castle. His name was Gregory, the kind of man who wore expensive loafers without socks and thought his word was law. He looked at me with that smug half-smile, the one that tells you he already thinks he's won before you've said a word. He explained that the HOA had acted in the best interest of the community, and that if I wanted to rebuild, I'd have to submit plans for their approval. Approval on my own land. That was the moment I knew we weren't just neighbors. We were enemies. Now, I wasn't about to let them think they could push me around. My father taught me that when someone takes something from you, you don't just patch the wound. You show them you're not to be messed with again. And so, I started digging into things literally and figuratively. While walking along the lake, I found myself staring at the dam more often. It was sturdy but old. Few people knew the truth. That dam wasn't owned by the HOA. It was private, but the paperwork had been buried for years. I drove to the county clerk's office, and sure enough, there it was. The dam, and the land around it, belonged to a single owner, a man in his 80s who had moved 2 states away. Taxes were still being paid, but I figured it was only a matter of time before he wanted to sell. That was my opening. After a few phone calls and a long drive out to meet him, I sat across from the man at his kitchen table. He remembered my grandfather. He remembered the work they'd put into the dam. When I told him about the HOA and what they'd done, he nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting something like this. By the time I left his house, the papers were signed. The dam, and everything it controlled, was mine. The power that came with that realization was like fire in my veins. Every one of those mansions, worth millions, sat on the edge of a lake that I now owned. Without the dam, that lake was nothing but a muddy ditch. They had destroyed my bridge, a piece of my history, without hesitation. Now, I had the power to erase their present. I didn't act right away. I let the knowledge simmer, kept it quiet, and let the HOA continue their nonsense for a few weeks. They sent another letter telling me to remove an old shed near the property line. They complained about the aesthetic impact of my tractor being parked in view of their lake. Every insult, every demand, I tucked away like logs on a fire I was preparing to light. The day came in late summer. The air was heavy with heat, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes you impatient. I drove out to the dam early in the morning, long before anyone else was awake. With the paperwork in hand and the lock replaced on the gate, I began the process of opening the sluice. Slowly, steadily, the water began to drain. At first, it was subtle. The lake dropped an inch, then two. But by noon, the shoreline started to look strange. Docks hung loose, pontoon boats leaned awkwardly, their motors sucking at mud. By the time the sun set, the lake had retreated several feet, exposing the ugly bottom no one had ever thought they'd see. Phones must have been ringing off the hook in the HOA president's mansion, because that evening he showed up in my driveway, red-faced and furious. He shouted about property values, about lawsuits, about how I was destroying everything they had built. I let him rant until he was out of breath. Then I held up the deed to the dam, right there in front of him, and told him the truth. This lake only exists because I allow it. You destroyed my bridge. I reminded him, a piece of my family's history. Now, I've taken something far bigger from you. His face went pale.